big bro, help! The train to the concert is super crowded, and my carefully styled hair is getting all messed up. Got it. I'm on my way. What about our daughter's doctor appointment? Well, on our way to the hospital with our daughter, who had a high fever, my husband got a call from his sister asking for help. He dropped me and our daughter off in the middle of the journey and drove off to meet his sister at the station. Wait a minute. What are we supposed to do now, being dropped off here? I was slightly panicking and asked my husband this, not expecting to be left like this. His parting words were, "Just call a cab or something," leaving me stunned with anger and disbelief. My daughter, held in my arms, was breathing feverishly, asking for help. The parent and I rushed. I tried contacting a taxi company, but couldn't catch one easily, which made me even more anxious. But to calm down, I took a deep breath and looked around, realizing I was in a familiar place and sought help from a family member. As a result, my husband ended up in a difficult situation. I met my husband in my mid-20s, and we married 2 years later. Our marriage was far from a sweet honeymoon phase, as I got pregnant soon after we got married. At Patience, I had terrible morning sickness, and the delivery was long and difficult, as the baby took a long time to come out. But that made me love and cherish our child even more. Now we are a family of 3, with our 5-year-old daughter leading a reasonably happy life. After my daughter was born, I quit my job but started working part-time once she began kindergarten. By this time, I was in my early 30s and my husband was approaching his late 30s. He has a younger sister who was still in high school when we got married. She was a typical teenager and I often felt a generation gap. Except Peel now, an adult and working, she's still not quite independent, at least from what I see. Doesn't bother me that she still lives with her parents, but what concerns me is how my husband still spoils her a lot. It was natural for him to look after his teenage sister, and I understood her asking him for money, but I wish she would be more independent since he now has his own family. However, old habits die hard. My husband managed his finances within his allowance, not touching our family budget, but with less disposable income, the amount he could give to his sister decreased. Why did Big Bro have to get married? She would say this out loud within my hearing whenever she came over. I just can't seem to warm up to my sister-in-law, who looks at me with such open hostility, as if I'm the enemy of her parents. She's always bad-mouthing, but thankfully she hasn't caused any direct harm to me or my daughter, so I deal with her when I have to, brush off her comments when I can, and try not to get involved or be around her when it's not necessary. I also have a younger brother. Sure, he used to pamper me before I got married and even gave me some pocket money when I started working, but as I began dating my husband, naturally the distance grew between my brother and me. It's not like we're avoiding each other or that my brother dislikes my husband. It's more like we've each started walking our own paths, kind of like a natural drifting apart that happens between siblings. After I got married, my brother moved out and started living alone. We became quite distant, though not estranged, and would meet up with family occasionally. That said, it's not like we don't communicate at all. When someone suggests a family get-together, we both show up and have lively conversations. I see this as a perfectly normal relationship. So, the fact that my husband hasn't distanced himself from his sister, who still acts like a daddy's girl, is something I just can't wrap my head around. After a year into her job, my sister-in-law faced an increase in workload as new employees joined, and it seemed she couldn't linger in the newbie mindset anymore. Aristotle Sikiltier. Due to the company's policy, she couldn't do overtime or work on weekends, and even if she did, she wouldn't get paid for it. She wasn't good at managing her work, leading to an increased burden, and she started consulting my husband about these issues. At first, she would talk in front of me and her daughter, but gradually she began calling my husband without considering the time. It almost felt like she was monitoring us, calling him right when he was about to play with our daughter or on days he had promised to take her out. Eventually, our daughter began to wonder, does Dad hate me? It pleaded with him to keep his promises to our daughter, but his response was, it's okay for you to play with our daughter, but I'm the only one who can help my sister. How can I ignore her when she relies solely on me? And that was the end of the discussion. I didn't know where to begin to argue, and it became a hassle, so I stopped saying anything more. Taking my silence as consent, he gradually started going to his sister's house even without being called, and it was every weekend. I thought he might spend at least one day of the long weekend with our daughter, but he ended up staying at his sister's for 2 nights and 3 days, leaving me speechless. After the weekend, when kindergarten discussions turned to what everyone did, our daughter could only say we went to the nearby park, unable to join in the fun conversations, which made her sad. I was worried when her teacher mentioned she seemed down. I explained the situation, and while the teacher was relieved it wasn't due to illness, she advised me to consider our daughter's feelings more. We could take her to an amusement park or something, but once when my husband was away, I took her to a nearby mall. Just when he got home before us, his cold words hit me. That you two are so carefree. I bet you don't have any worries. That's why you can be so indifferent to my sister's major issues. I was shocked to find out that the major issue was just a crush. I thought, why can't she talk about that with her friends? Since then, I felt it's better to stay quiet home when my husband is away on his sister's matters, and it became the norm. But staying quiet is just to avoid arguments with my husband, and it's not a good environment for our daughter. I'm willing to endure some sarcastic remarks from my husband, if it's for her sake. I've decided that from now on, no matter what he says, I'm going to create happy memories for our daughter. Some months later, during a holiday weekend with consecutive days off, my husband was unexpectedly at home as there were no calls from his sister. However, the weather was changing and my daughter couldn't adjust, ending up with a fever. Initially, it seemed like a cold, but her condition worsened and her fever spiked. It was clear we needed to go to a hospital with emergency services. I was relieved when my husband said he'd drive, but during the ride, his sister called. He asked me to put the phone on speaker, and I held it while he talked. She was on her way to a concert, complaining about the crowded train, which was worse than rush hour. She asked to be picked up because her new outfit and hairstyle were getting ruined. For me, it was a moment of utter disbelief and anger, but I tried to stay calm and gently explained that was impossible because her daughter had a high fever and we were on our way to the hospital. However, my sister-in-law wouldn't take no for an answer, insisting on finding a way. I thought my husband would refuse, citing her daughter's critical condition, but shockingly, he pulled over and forcefully dragged us out of the car. He said he was now free to go to her, telling her to wait in a speeding car. I always knew he had a sister complex, but this was beyond anything reasonable. Up on the sidewalk, I was stunned, but I couldn't afford to stay dazed. I urgently started looking up taxi companies to get to the hospital. But the more I panicked, the more flustered I became, worrying about my daughter's labored breathing. I had to stop, look up at the sky, and take a deep breath to calm myself. That's when I realized we were near my brother's apartment building. It was a long shot during the holiday, but when I called him, he was actually home. I tried to explain the situation as calmly as I could, but I was probably too frantic. He told me to stay put and hung up, saying he was on his way. My brother, who is quite fashion conscious and never steps out in just his casual home clothes, arrived and just sat with his hair still messy from sleep. I was moved to tears by how quickly he came to help. But on the way, I told him everything. I was emotional and probably biased in my explanation. But after hearing it all, he just said I did well and comforted me. He also encouraged my daughter, promising her that he'd take care of everything. He then focused on driving, and just having him there was reassuring. My brother has always been a hero to me, always sensing when I'm in trouble and extending a helping hand. When we got to the hospital, my daughter had to undergo several tests. The mention of tests brought the worst scenarios to my mind. What if something happened to her? Where did I go wrong? Should I have brought her in when it was just a slight fever? If I hadn't trusted my husband's words and had taken a taxi from the start, could I have gotten her to the hospital sooner? I must have looked pale and lost as a nurse asked if I was okay, bringing me back to reality. My brother said he'd gather the necessary things for a possible admission and left the hospital, reassuring me that tests don't always mean bad results. He took care of gathering what we might need, allowing me to focus on my daughter. While I was busy with the hospital paperwork, my husband called. I had my phone on silent mode, but the persistent vibration was irritating. I decided to answer it, if only to concentrate on the paperwork. Who is this? Have you dialed the wrong number? I answered unemotionlessly. I could sense my husband's frustration on the other end of the line as he explained who he was and why he had left us on the side of the road. I could sense my husband's surprise and confusion on the other end, but as soon as he realized it was indeed me, he switched back to his usual self-centered demeanor. "Stop messing around and help me," he demanded. I thought he might be stuck in traffic after dropping off his sister. "Just take your time and come back. We're here dealing with our daughter's hospital admission and test explanations. It's hectic." Apparently, after dropping off his sister and returning home, he found my brother and parents waiting for him, having arrived right when he did. "Why are you involving your brother?" he accused. If you had time for that, there was no need to rush to the hospital, he questioned, wondering how my brother knew about leaving us behind for his sister's errand. After hearing what had happened, my brother had gone to our parents for help with the admission preparations, and that's when he told them everything. Enraged, they had gone to our house to confront my husband. He was caught off guard and had been lectured for an hour. I was so fed up, and he demanded that I convince my brother and parents to let him go. My brother was furious, having seen our daughter's high fever state firsthand, and my husband was panicking, screaming that my brother was going to kill him. Just in his younger days, my brother was known for being tough and good at fighting, and now my husband was terrified of getting hit by him. My husband, in his usual self-centered way, said he was about to hand the phone to my big brother and demanded that I talk him down without considering our situation at all. I had enough of my husband, who didn't even bother to ask about our daughter, only caring about his own safety. I told him I'd already talked to my big brother, and there was no reason for me to listen to his side of the story. I will never forgive a father who left his daughter saying, "I'm disgusted to realize that even in our daughter's emergency, he was too embarrassed to show up after the scolding, just a worthless man." The next afternoon, the ER doctor said she could be discharged as her test results and conditions were okay. I told my big brother and parents, and they suggested taking the taxi home. I didn't want to return to a home where my husband, who had abandoned our daughter, was asked accompanies and asked if it would be all right for me and my daughter to stay at my parents' house for a while. They agreed but wanted me to at least show up at her house first. I wondered what my daughter truly felt returning to a house with a father who left her behind. Could she really go back to that house and face him without any issues? I just hoped no more traumatic events would add to what already happened in her young heart. Amidst these conflicting emotions, we returned home to find my big brother waiting for us. My gaze then shifted to my parents, and beyond them, my in-laws, my husband and my sister were there too. His sister and in-laws joining in. What was the situation? I couldn't understand what my big brother was trying to do. Then he whispered that he had called my in-laws over after they'd been informed the night before. It seemed like a second round of scolding had been going on for quite some time, with my husband and his sister looking downcast and exhausted. His sister seemed to be pouting, wondering why she was involved while my in-laws surprisingly were on my brother's side, scolding them both sternly. My husband looked at me with eyes full of blame for not helping him yesterday. He was still holding a grudge because I didn't rescue him. No matter how he glared, I knew I hadn't done anything wrong and wasn't seeking his forgiveness. Why should I seek forgiveness for a husband who did nothing for us? It made no sense to me. But as the primary victim, I decided to respect my daughter's wishes unless she showed signs of being upset by the situation. However, I was ready to do anything to protect her if anyone made hurtful remarks or actions. How long can I keep my composure in such a situation? I took a deep breath to keep my emotions in check and sat down ready to face whatever was to come. Then my in-laws urged my husband and his sister to apologize. It seemed like they had already agreed to apologize once my daughter and I returned home. But getting a mere formality of an apology from people who don't really mean it didn't make me happy at all. In fact, it felt even more irritating. But not getting any apology at all would be infuriating too. Either way, if my feelings wouldn't be soothed, I thought maybe it's better to at least have them apologize. I've always taught my daughter to say sorry when she's done something wrong, so it's only right that her father shows that he can do the same. As the apologies from my husband and his sister felt extremely reluctant, as if they were just going through the motions. They both tried to justify themselves by saying they didn't know it was serious enough for hospitalization. But I couldn't help thinking, if there hadn't been a hospitalization, would they have felt no need to apologize at all? But it was a superficial apology with no genuine remorse, and their insolent attitude was evident. After hearing their apology, I told my husband that I had something to say. I get your point, but remember I declared that I wouldn't forgive you, right? I want a divorce. When I mentioned divorce, my husband, who had been meek in front of his parents, suddenly became defensive, insisting that divorce was too extreme. I didn't want to ask him the pointless question of who he values more, our daughter or his sister, as both are his family and it's not right to make him choose. But in this case, one was sick, and the other was just a matter of personal interest. Life should obviously take precedence over a hobby. Wasn't he taught that life is invaluable and irreplaceable? And yet, when our daughter was in pain and asked for his help, he didn't hesitate to abandon her. How could I even think of reconciling with a husband who so blatantly betrayed our daughter's trust? Even if I condemned myself as a devil, I wouldn't back down from my decision to divorce. The apology earlier was clearly just for show to calm the situation. How much more could he disrespect everything? The man who proposed to me and whom I accepted was nothing but a fool, ignorant of the world. But since I chose him, I have to accept the consequences, though I feel terrible for my daughter who didn't get to choose her father. Staying firm on my decision for a divorce, my husband turned to our daughter for salvation. It wasn't a big deal, right? I'm usually a kind dad, and that was just an exception. I'm not bad. Explain that to her, otherwise we can't live together anymore, right? What? We can't live together if we get divorced. So he's assuming he won't take custody of our daughter. I knew he wasn't indifferent to our daughter, but he always puts his sister first, never changing even after becoming a father. He doesn't want to divorce, doesn't want to be separated from our daughter, but if it comes to that, he wouldn't want her. it's like he's saying his sister matters more. Children are often sensitive to adults' casual remarks. Our daughter reacted to his comments. "If we get divorced, you can't live with Dad anymore, right?" When he reached out to hold her hand, she rejected him. "Papa, you always break promises and don't play with me. You're an adult, but a liar. When I was in pain and asked you for help, you said you would, but you didn't and left me and Mommy behind." She spoke through her sobs, trying hard not to cry, but she couldn't hold it in and burst into tears. The terror I felt for my husband, who pushed our 5-year-old daughter to this point, was immense. Acceptations, I staples the Cordy, I reaffirmed my determination to get a divorce no matter how long it takes as I hugged her. My daughter holding my hand was the one who kept my reason from completely breaking down. I hugged my daughter tightly, determined to protect her no matter what. Bitter as she spoke up, the anger of my in-laws and parents, which had almost subsided, flared up again. They were furious that he had been neglecting his own child, not just this time but regularly. It came out that he had canceled planned trips and holidays all for his sister, and my in-laws apologized deeply to us. They admitted they might have gone wrong somewhere in raising 2 adults who still behaved like 3-year-olds. They decided to take my husband and his sister home with them, dragging them away. Turns out the refunds from the canceled trips and such were used by my husband to buy expensive gifts for his sister and parents, to make up for his past negligence. We were used to my husband for his sister. It's possible that from the start, my ex-husband planned to go on a trip with his sister while pretending it was a family vacation, thinking that I'd be more willing to spend on a rare family outing. He repeatedly canceled events that our daughter was looking forward to right before or on the day itself under the pretense of these family plans. Eventually, under pressure from his parents, my ex-husband agreed to the divorce. But with their help, I was able to negotiate a higher than average child support payment. Every time they saw us, my in-laws apologized for my ex-husband and his sister's outrageous behavior. I wonder how such sensible people raise children like them. It must be the result of my ex-husband excessively spoiling his sister. I've heard that sisters are often adored unconditionally, but his level of obsession seemed abnormal. My ex-husband, dissatisfied with the divorce, went to his colleagues who were shocked upon learning the full story. One of them, a father with a sister not much younger than himself, even lectured him that he should discipline his sister more. His complaints were loud enough for others to hear, and the story of our divorce quickly spread through his workplace. He mistakenly thought his colleague was spreading the news. That was as a result, his failures at work piled up, and his bosses, tired of covering for him, sidelined him. He was practically permanently demoted, especially since he was working at a subsidiary company. As for his sister, she was dumped by her fiancé, whom she had proudly talked about marrying. Apparently, she was the only one who thought they were in a relationship. The guy had no intentions. She often canceled plans with him to meet my ex-husband, so it's no wonder he wouldn't consider marrying her. Shocked by the breakup, She quit her job and has since been withdrawn at home, showing no signs of returning to society. As for me, during the divorce negotiations, I had the chance to keep the house in my name, but with so many bad memories there and not wanting to burden my aging parents, I declined. After the divorce, my daughter and I moved back to my parents' home. My big brother also moved closer to our family home and spends a lot of time playing with my daughter when he's free. Our home has become more bright and cheerful than when I was living with my ex-husband, with my parents helping with childcare. They say they feel rejuvenated being around my daughter. I'm working part-time and looking for a full-time job, hoping to provide a better life for us. My daughter is happier now, and we are living a contented life. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you resonated with the content, please leave a positive rating and a comment.